live stream with my other phone, and it always overheats, especially out 90 plus weather. Finally get some shade over the carving. That's good. That's what I wanted. Gonna fill another tank of fuel and oil here and do a little bit more work on this. Last video that I just posted was opening up in between the legs. That was the goal for today, was to get that far, and then so now I can see kind of the posture of the carving that I want. Now I just work around that. I keep looking at that front view, and that tells me everything. It looks like it's moving sort of now. Hopefully anyway. Well, that tank's empty. So yeah, just a lot of picking and poking at it right now. Trying to get the, holy cow, there's a bunch. Yo, what up? Yo, what up, man? Yeah, I can't hear when you guys chime in, and I can't see it if I'm over there working, so sorry if I don't stop and check in. I get into my work, I get my flow going, and I just keep plugging away. The problem with this piece that I let happen, because I kept it uncovered for the past year since I started it. I started it about this time last year, I think. So now it's all dried out. It was primo wood. I mean, it was beautiful carbon wood. Now it's a super dry piece of wood, which is fine. But it does tend to, it either cuts really hard or it tends to cut super easy. Some areas do flake off a little that have been hit by weather real hard, but nothing I can do about that at this point. The idea behind these is you get them to this point, or you get them roughed out, and then you get them inside. Take them inside the barn, put them under cover, or even wrap them under a tarp out here. That's why we stay back. I was just enough out of line from the saw to not catch that. It could have been bad. Could have been really bad. It wasn't scary by any means. I do it all the time, but just to show you guys what happens, how it happens really quick. Just takes one little catch. I was expecting it. I was ready for it, but still, I had to actually move my head out of the way. If you could replay that and slow-mo it, you would see that. Yeah, yes. Oh, gotta get a. Forgot to get a GoPro going. Because I try to document so I can save on computer and then put together a nice video of this deal. Forgot to do that on this one. Yep, said hi. Did you guys see the saw jump? I almost take my head off. That was pretty cool, wasn't it? It happens. It's part of what we do out here. And two, where you start to get to that point where you're almost done with the big bar. You're almost done with the longer bar. Each time you get to that point where you're almost done with it, that's when you're more liable to have more near misses or more accidents because you actually need it less. You start needing a shorter one more. Well, thanks for being here, guys. There's still a number of people here. Thanks for hanging out. I think I'm done for the day. My arms are starting to feel a little bit like we need to go do something else. Yeah, so we're kind of there with it. Been waiting to get some stuff done here. Okay. Provisions are almost all used up for the day. All the cold waters. All my fruit juicy drinks. We're getting low on supply. So now his legs look skinny, but that's because the rest of him still has a lot. I still left a lot to the rest of him. I got to thin the neck down quite a bit. Well, actually not. I'll thin it down a little bit. I don't know though. You know, if you look at bears, if you look at pictures of them, I got to bring his belly up a little bit higher. His torso is super long still, so I got to bring the belly up a little bit higher, which is going to raise his hip line. It's going to make his legs look longer. Neck could be thinned a little bit. Shoulders are still super wide. Bears don't have really super wide shoulders. I mean, you know, it's a representation of a bear. It's just a carving. It doesn't have to be all that in a bag of chips. Let's see. You know, it doesn't have to be all that perfect, I guess. Dang thing. No. Okay. A lot of fiddling around here. Yep, now you're going to see part of the camera stand. So yeah, and I need to bring that the leading arm, or the arm that's across his torso, I need to trim it down still. You see that I'm just going now, taking out pieces and parts here, not really taking out big chunks anymore, just trimming right now, just trimming it down. I'm ready for the smaller saw. That's going to definitely make life a lot easier in the long run. I don't think I need I don't really need the bigger saw for any cuts. And his one leg appears as though it might be coming out a little shorter than the other, which, because that's the forward leg, that's the lead leg, the opposite of the lead arm. When you're walking. Sorry, sawdust down my throat and up my nose. I gotta figure out the length on the arms still. Like, I'll get a tape measure out. I'm lazy like that. That's all to come on this. And you see there's like a bluish or grayish wood on the outside of the arms. That's garbage wood. I'm still trying to get rid of that. What are you doing? Well, if you look at the screen, you'll see what I'm doing. It's a piece of wood that I'm making a carving in, and it's taller than me, so it's kind of hard to get it right. It's not really hard, it's just a lot of back and forth. Here, I'll show you my size versus this. So it's a lot of work. This is the saw that I'm using here. I guess this guy's new, dropping in just now. That's the saw. So there, now you see what I'm doing. I'm chainsaw carving. It's a pretty popular thing on YouTube, has become. That saw is for reference, that's a 2-foot bar on that saw. So that's, for reference, that's the size of the carving. The carving's about 6 feet or taller, because I'm 5.5 feet. Thereabouts, I'm short. Question is there, Henchman, what are you doing? Is that your name, Henchman? How do you say it? I don't know. But yeah, I want to thin out. I can't see my target because the size. So I got to thin out the arms, got to thin out the shoulders, slim the neck down a little bit. It's funny how tiny that carving makes that big saw look. It's not a big saw, it's a mid-size. But when you're holding it up to your chest and trying to make weird cuts with it, it can feel a little bit big sometimes. So my plan is to raise up the belly, to bring the belly up a little bit more, and especially on the one side, because the one leg, the leg that's going to be coming more forward, looks like it's short now because I haven't pushed the hip up yet. But like I said, it's all touch and go. It's picking and poking at it, taking little pieces at a time. I don't know, what are you doing? I'm just out enjoying a Sunday, a nice day. What are you guys up to? Anybody doing anything fun, exciting, different? In the last video, I did a video earlier, and then my other phone overheated, so I stopped doing the video. We had a special guest appearance. He came over to check out the carving. The old yellow praying mantis, the one who's losing all his color. He's roaming around here. Guessing it was a he because it was really skinny and he's losing his color. And I heard that the males only mate once and then they die. I'm not sure if that's true or not. I haven't looked it up. If somebody wants to research it. Positive things today. Figured out the fluid levels on the backhoe for moving logs. A friend of mine bought the backhoe, and he's really smart, and he's telling me I'm looking at it all wrong. The fluids on this backhoe there's a like an intermediary final or intermediary reservoir or intermediary final drive, secondary drive or whatever, bypass in between the two, between the transmission and the hydraulics. So you gotta take fluid from one and put it in the other, because I think that drive was get cavitated or just too full. Because as soon as I took 3 liters out of the transmission and I put it in the hydraulics, it's working great now. So that was cool to figure that out, because that's kind of been on my mind, trying to get that right and wrap my head around it. I'm not too smart about all these things. I only know what these things, what I learn. And a lot of the learning that I do is just by taking information from other people. So there's a number of people here. What are you guys up to? What's going on? I'm sitting here talking to a camera. Got my GoPro footage of this stage. Unfortunately, I missed the one part that I wanted to get. I was in too big of a hurry to do it and get it going, so I forgot to get my GoPro out. That was the goal for the day, was to get the space in between the legs cut out, because then I could actually see the movement of the piece. So yeah, there's that. I guess I'm gonna boot out. Geez, there keeps being more people here every time I look up. But well, thanks for hanging out, guys. Not a lot going on in the chats here, so I said hi to everybody. I said hi to Alali, Scrub. What up, man? What up, Scrub? Said what up a while ago. So does that make sense, Alali? Alal? Whatever. How do you say your name? Henchman? Hancham? So thanks for being around, guys. We'll see you later.